Good morning. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway. I'm glad you joined me this morning for this time. We're going to be having our service today at 10:30 in Garrison, and we want to invite you to come and be a part of that. I also minister at Riverdale Community Church, and that service begins at 8:30 this morning. Any of those services, we'd love to have you come by and share with us in worship of the Lord. Today I want to talk to you about a strange concept in our culture called the rule of law. And why exactly do we have a rule of law? I'll be talking about several different people in history that brought us to this point, and also some of the concepts that are a part of this idea of the rule of law. But right now, I'd like to talk to you about somebody very important in that process that we don't often think about. I want to take you back to the year 893. And I want you to look and meet one of the most amazing men in English history. He wrote a document which would transform English law and eventually work its way down into American law. The concept that he would lay down would be laid down in a book called the Doomsday Book. The man was Alfred the Great. His book would be published throughout his area of authority. It would be published in Saxon so that people could understand it, because he was, after all, a Saxon king. It would become the basis of British law, and it would set the standard for all British kings that followed him. In England, rule of law would become the standard. Alfred was a deeply Christian man, deeply committed to his Christian faith and to the idea that all of us are responsible before God. In an age when most kings could not read or write, Alfred was an accomplished author in both Saxon and Latin. In the prologue to the Doomsday Book, he wrote these words: that English law should be, quote, a tradition of Christian law, from which the law code draws, but also it grounds secular law upon Scripture, especially upon the principle of mercy. His purpose for the Doomsday Book was clearly outlined by paraphrasing Leviticus chapter 19, verse 15. The word doom that I will be using literally in ancient Saxon means judgment. And this is how he wrote it: doom very evenly. Do not doom one doom for the rich, another for the poor, nor doom one doom for your friend, another for your foe. Alfred, in opposition to most rulers of his time, believed that all people were responsible equally before the law. However, law was to be mitigated by mercy if the circumstances demanded it. If a person was repentant, or if there were extenuating circumstances that led to their criminal behavior, then mercy was to be extended. To us, this seems natural, but it was at that time, and still is in many parts of the world, unfathomable. What Alfred believed and established was based on what we now call Judeo-Christian thought, but Alfred just simply called it Scripture. Rule of law is founded on one principle that comes directly from the teaching of Paul in Romans. Thomas Aquinas, the great medieval theologian and philosopher, would identify it as natural law. It is that sense of what is right and wrong that is placed in our conscience due to creation or nature. Paul would state in Galatians that this is the basis of law and order. Paul informs us that law exists because of sin in our human nature. Libertinism promotes the idea that human nature is good in and of itself, even when we as humans follow our selfish desire and hurt other people. To a true libertine, that is still justifiable if we are strong enough to enforce our actions. Paul would say that the ultimate purpose of law is to treat our neighbors lovingly and fairly. Unfortunately, Paul recognizes that our self-centeredness always gets in the way, and we are inevitably unfair, unjust, cruel, abusive, mercenary, or immoral, unless there is something that restrains those things within our nature. Paul says we wish to be different in Romans, but our desire gets in our way. The law, in fact, all law, as Paul indicates in Romans, is put in place to constrain our selfish indulgences. If people can enforce law on others while exempting themselves, great evil ensues. The rule of law is simple. Everyone, including those who make the laws and those who enforce the laws, must live under the laws that are created. For Christians, Paul indicated that this should be easy, for we have surrendered our self-will to that of Jesus Christ, and we voluntarily live within the laws of nations because of our love for our neighbors and our respect and honor for Jesus Christ. The only time when that becomes a problem for us as Christians is when those laws made by a nation or made by a king or made by anyone else come directly into conflict with our commitment to Jesus Christ. What God hates, it says in the Old Testament, is unjust measurements. And what Christians despise, or should despise, are arbitrary laws applied without justice or mercy that are based in hatred or self-willed intent. Jesus would say, "The measure with which you measure others will be the same measure used on you." Over the centuries, the principle Alfred established would work its way out in English law and government, and eventually it would become the basis of the American Constitution. Or as Paul would tell us, we also know that law is made not for the righteous, but for the lawbreakers and the rebels. Law and order is something that Christians support not because it is in our best interest, but because it is in everyone's best interest. It constrains lawlessness. It constrains selfishness. It constrains abuse. Lawlessness is something that destroys all of those things and ultimately is unfair to everybody. So as Christians, we want justice and fairness for everyone. And that is an important principle of Christian faith. Alfred understood that, and we need to understand that. Thank you for listening today. God bless you. Hope to see you in church.